Jamil Zainasheff joins me this week for a beer brewing question and answer session. This is BeerSmith podcast number 220. This is BeerSmith podcast number 220, and it's early August 2020. Jamil Zainasheff joins me this week for a beer brewing question and answer session. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass, with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith to get your all-access pass today. And also the Brew Commander, the new complete brewhouse controller from Blickman Engineering. It's available in electric and gas propane models. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a high-quality brewhouse controller with exact precision and the ultimate in flexibility. Whether integrated or freestanding, the Brew Commander offers automated step mashing, boil timers, and amazing advanced settings. Whatever your setup, the Brew Commander offers precision temperature control with perfect repeatability. Command your brew day with a new Brew Commander. To order yours today, visit blickmanengineering.com for more information. Again, that's blickmanengineering.com. And finally, I urge you to give BeerSmith 3 brewing software a try. I recently released a BeerSmith 3.1 desktop update, which includes improved data storage, additional dry hop options, new mash pH models, new add-ons, and more. To download your free 21-day trial, go to beersmith.com today. Again, that's beersmith.com. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Jamil Zainasheff. Jamil is the owner and founder of Heretic Brewing near San Francisco, as well as an award-winning professional and homebrewer. Jamil authored the books Brewing Classic Styles and The Practical Guide to Beer Fermentation, and he also co-hosts the Brew Strong Network. Brew Strong podcast on the Brewing Network. Jamil, it's great to have you back on the show, man.
It's great to be back, brother.
I was talking about you actually said to me that you hadn't been on the show before, but I looked it up. You were on in 2011.
Wow. Time flies.
A couple of years ago.
You drink enough and you forget what happened 11 years ago or 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And you forget how to do math.
And I mean, a lot has happened since then. You had just founded Heretic Brewing, I think, at that time, and just made the leap from home brewer to professional brewer. And now, of course, you're doing very well, I think, or at least were before the pandemic.
Yeah, we've been growing, and I like to say we grow at a pint at a time. And the great customers that we've had over the years have been loyal and have been continue to drink our beer, and that really helps.
Excellent. Well, we'll talk a little more about Heretic at the end, but today you agreed to come on and do some brewing questions and answers with us. So I put together a bunch of questions from BeerSmith users, listeners, and a few that I had as well. Before we dive into that, though, I was wondering if you could share the story of how you got into home brewing, of course, because you started as a home brewer.
Yeah, I did. My neighbor, Steve, he one day came to me and handed me a beer across the fence. He's like, Jamil, you got to try this beer. I tried it. It was delicious. It was the best beer I had ever had. And so I asked him, I said, Steve, where do I buy this beer? How much does it cost? What's it called? And he's like, you can't buy it anywhere. I brewed it myself. And I was blown away. I thought, you need German people and stainless steel and a big factory to make beer. And so I was amazed. And I told my wife about it. And I said, Steve's made this great beer. He did it himself. And so she remembered that. And for Christmas, she got me a Mr. Beer kit. And the Mr. Beer kit, through no fault of its own, I turned out a very mediocre beer to start with. I wouldn't say it was horrible, but it wasn't good. And so, having tried Steve's, if I had bought commercial beer only and then did the Mr. Beer kit, I probably would have said, oh, you just can't make it yourself. Having tried Steve's, it, I knew that it could taste great. And so it set me off on a path of learning and trying. And over the years, I got better and better at it. So that's how I started.
And when was that? When did you actually start brewing?
That was 1999.
Wow. So, I mean, that was fairly, not quite as long ago as some of us, I think, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm just a young.
You're fairly new to this whole thing.
Yeah.
I started in 87, so.
Only a couple of decades for me.
And then, of course, you're a home brewer all the way through the 90s, I think, right? And when did you start Heretic?
Or through through Heretic.
I'm sorry, through the aughts, I should have said.
Yes. Heretic was, the corporation was formed October of 2010, and we brewed our first beer in May of 2011.
Awesome. Well, of course, you were award-winning homebrewer as well for a long time, right?
I still consider myself a homebrewer. I will always be a homebrewer. I'm going to live and die as a homebrewer. And I like to think, what we do now is just, I'm a homebrewer on a larger scale, and I get to sell what I make. That's, I still do all sorts of crazy things and try all sorts of weird stuff. And that's homebrewing to me.
Just with the larger batches now, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into some random questions here. The first one is, how do you get haze into a hazy IPA?
Oh, that's an excellent question. It's, far more complex than you would think. There's wrong ways to get haze in there, and there's right ways to get haze in there. Mm-hmm. If you just have a whole bunch of yeast that's still in suspension because the beer hasn't fermented fully, that's the wrong way. And that's something I hate. You end up getting poured something like that, and eventually you get these big yeast slugs that settle on the bottom of the glass, and you've got it's just nasty. It's not.
So kind of like a Hefeweizen or something like that, huh?
Yeah, not even that. Just totally wrong. I mean, I've seen these things where it's just a giant pile of half fermented wort and yeast, and people call those hazies. At least in the beginning, they did. Now I think people have learned a lot. So it's a protein tannin complex. The polyphenols and the proteins, they form a permanent bond. It has to be the right size. There's certain types of proteins that bond better to the polyphenols, and then also and that's pretty much the majority of the haze that you want.
I mean, that's what we call a chill haze typically, when you get the polyphenols joining up with the proteins, right?
Right. But you want that, extensively, and you want a bunch of it to form and to stay. So that the kind of yeast can affect it, your water profile can affect it, but the main things are high protein grains, mm-hmm. and to bond with the substantial polyphenols that you're going to get from the grain husks and from the hops that are going in there. So the thing is, people use things like wheat and oats, and they have a lot of gluten in them. The more gluten you add, the worse it is for your haze. It will actually reduce your haziness, provide a clearer beer. So you have to be careful about that. You don't want to, and if you're turning towards wheat or something like that to provide these high protein grains, you're going to end up with some issues there.
So what do you recommend? What's the magic combo of grains and hops and so on that kind of pulls it all together?
I would look for extra high protein wheats. There are some manufacturers who are producing these now, mm-hmm. and it's mainly for use in hazy beer brewing, I think. So if you can get a wheat malt that is 15% protein, 18%, and one of the reasons is wheat tends to be more proline rich, so that adds to your haze. Mm-hmm. So that's what you're looking for.
And I assume a lot of the polyphenols come from the hops themselves, right? Because you're making an IPA.
Yeah, quite a bit, but also don't disregard the amount of um, polyphenols that you're getting from the grain husks. So grain husks actually provide a substantial amount in a beer. That's why you get chill haze in a beer with very light hopping.
Mm-hmm. Next question. You co-authored, I should say, Brewing Classic Styles, and also contributed to the BJCP Style Guide. So which style beer is actually your favorite?
Yeah, I get asked that quite a bit. And, what I love is a well-made beer. And there's no style. When I first started learning to brew and I found the BJCP Style Guides, it was quite an education for me. So like, look at all these different beers, and I would go out and buy them and try them. And initially, I'd be like, oh, when I first tried certain beers, I'm like, that's terrible. And then once I learned how they were brewed and why they were brewed, why they were the way they were, I started enjoying them a lot more. I started being able to discern what was a good example and what was a bad example. And so once I learned, what made a great version of the style, I started enjoying all those styles. There's no style that I really don't enjoy. I tend to favor lower alcohol beers. I know it's weird because we're making a lot of high alcohol beers at Heretic. Every so often, we just made one called Amnesia Juice at 16.5%.
Wow.
IPA. So, my preference tends to be for British bitters, British milds on cask would be my favorite. And then, that would be something I'd drink the most of if I could get it here, which I can't. And then I would go with, probably a West Coast IPA or something like that. But I enjoy all the styles, but those are the things. And I drink a lot of the hazies now too, since I like those as well. So
the New England's?
Kind of depends on where you are at the time. If you're in Cologne, your favorite beer is a Kolsch, right?
Absolutely.
So that's the way it goes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on a multi-step mash versus using a single step mash? And do you get a lot of value out of something like a triple decoction these days?
Well, I won't say there's not a difference doing it. I will say that, the issue tends to be, are you really making the best beer possible by going through those steps? A lot of times with the modern malts that we have, doing a multi-step mash, you really are not doing yourself any favors. There are malts you can use that will be more appropriate for a multi-step mash, but most of the stuff you're going to find in your homebrew shop is not that, and you're better off with a single infusion. The decoction, that's been a big debate. I did multi-step mashes and decoctions as a home brewer, and I tried those versus, single infusion. And I settled on single infusion as giving me really, I thought, the best and most reliable results. I don't want to brag here, but I'm about to. Joe Formanek once gave me 50 points for my Doppelbock.
Wow.
Competition. And, it's blind, of course. But I really respect Joe's opinion and his knowledge of beers and his ability as a judge. And for him to give me a 50, I was like, I don't think if I triple decocted it, somehow it would have been easier to get a 50, or I would have gotten a 51.
Right. Right. And I mean, that is one thing that's changed. A lot of the older books, if you open them up, they have the multi-step mashing and all this stuff. But a lot of that was done at a time when the malt quality was not what it is today, and the malts were not as modified, or high in enzymes, I should say, as they are today. Right.
Right. I agree completely. And people have been doing side-by-side comparisons and tests. It's one of the things that's really happened since I started in with podcasting and stuff is people have taken to heart the mantra of testing and doing side by sides and triangle tests. And so a lot of people have just dedicated themselves to that. There's various websites out there where that's what people are doing, and I think it's amazing. It teaches us a lot about brewing that I don't even think they knew commercially.
Yeah, they do the triangle tests. Brewlosophy is one of the biggest ones, I think, but there's a number of others, I think, as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Braukaiser.
Braukaiser, yeah.
Yeah. A number of people, yeah.
You run Heretic Brewing, obviously. How much work do you do adjusting your water profiles for various styles of beer at the brewery?
Well, I will tell you, for the first, number of years, we didn't do a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to focus on fermentation, sanitary conditions, packaging, things like that. And, that's a major part of brewing. And, if you're trying to change too many things at once, I think you end up doing none of it perfectly. So I wanted to take my time step by step, and not that we've perfected all those things and stopped perfecting those things, but around maybe 3 years in or so, we started having, instead of just one water adjustment, we broke it out into different water adjustments for different styles and
Mm-hmm.
changed it a little bit. And then when we started doing the hazies, I came up with another completely different water profile than we had been using for our hoppy beers, because it really required it. So we've been making more and more changes as time goes. Now that I feel everything is really solid and dialed in, I will craft new water profiles for new beers, or if I think an existing beer can be improved, I'll make a tweak to it. So generally, we're not making changes, every batch, but we'll brew a few, and then we'll see how we like it, and then we'll maybe make a little tweak, and we'll see how we like it. So
yeah, I mean, do you have a fairly neutral water profile to start with there? You're near San Francisco, I think, right?
Yeah, it's not too bad. We get our water from three sources. We get it from Lake Berryessa, which is a reservoir, man-made reservoir up in the hills, and then there's the river water that comes out of the Sierra Nevada, and then there is well water. So the well water is harder. The river water tends to be quite soft, since it's coming from snow runoff on granite mountains. And then the reservoir is kind of in between those. And so the water company kind of tries to blend it and keep it fairly consistent. So there's a fair amount of hardness in there, but it's generally pretty good. It's not bad at all. If I had not as many choices as I do, I'd be happy to and we actually literally just filter the water through carbon, and then we use it for brewing. So it goes into the hot liquor tank and some of the calcium precipitates out there, and then it goes on to be part of the brew.
And have you noticed big changes when you have adjusted the water or not? In terms of the flavor of the beer?
Not huge changes. I would say the biggest change was in the hazies, from when we very first started to when I made the water change. It really did soften it up more. It promoted more of that fruitiness and hoppiness, and I think it improved the haze slightly as well. So it was a definite. That was probably the biggest change that I've noticed.
How do you go about selecting your hops? And also, what's the most effective way to make sure the hops you're brewing with are fresh? Because a lot of people don't do that. They just open the package and throw it in.
Right. Well, freshness, you want to smell the hops. You want to look at the hops. You want to touch the hops. if your hops start looking yellowed or browned or something like that, or they start smelling cheesy or really skunky, then there's a problem with those hops. You don't want to use them. They should smell bright and floral and resiny and piney, or they rarely smell fruity, but there's subtle compounds of those mixed in. Generally, you'll get that bright resin. If they don't smell bright, if they smell dull and lifeless, then it's going to be dull and lifeless in your beer as well. Mm-hmm. So, that's the way you should check them. And you could make, if you're still not sure, you can make a little tea with it. Just hops and water, hot water, a pellet and some, a quarter cup of hot water or half cup of hot water, and just see what aromas come out when you do that. You can even taste it if you like. The way we ensure, our hop supply is contracting. And once you get into contracting enough and you have a relationship with the hop growers, they will send you, or you go up and you do hop selection, and they have a bunch of cuts of different lots of hops, because hops are not consistent across an entire field. The middle of the hop field versus the left side of the hop field versus the right side of the hop field, all is slightly different, because it's a natural agricultural product that the amount of sun, the amount of wind, the amount of water it got changes, what is produced, so how it turns out. And also, when it gets harvested. So if there are very large fields and, they're only harvesting, one section of it one day, and then you get the section that's harvested the next day, even in 24 hours, hops can change their character. It can build up more oils, but it can build up a little more of the garlic and onion kind of characteristics. So, or they can harvest it too early because they want to get the whole thing done in time. The earliest harvested stuff may not have developed quite what you're looking for either. So it's important, again, to smell and to check and see what is a good hop.
Have you started using hop blends instead of using a single variety, or are you still mostly using single variety type of hopping?
Right. So I tend not to like hop blends that are done for me at the hop supplier, because then I don't have enough control over it, and you're relying on somebody else to do it. Now, they are professionals. They have all the labs. They can do all the oil analysis and make it the same every year, and they're really good at that. So I should probably just trust that more. But I don't know. It's the home brewer in me that wants more control over every ingredient. And so one of the things I learned early on is not to rely on just one hop. If you have one hop and you've told everybody, hey, this beer's made, solely with Mosaic, and then you can't get any Mosaic, well, you can't brew that beer. If you believe that's the best beer possible, well, then you should do that. No issue there. But I think you can make a better beer using multiple hops, layering hops in. So if you're trying to develop something with a fruity flavor, pick not just one hop with fruit character, but a couple of them, and they will support and enhance, the character. If you use too many, it can be muddled. But if you use too few, it may not have as a bold an effect as you want. So if you want pine, select, multiple hops that have a lot of pine character. And by doing that, kind of layering the hops in, you'll get a richer character. And then if you have trouble getting a certain hop, or if, the latest crop of X hop is not as good as the previous year, you may increase the amount. You may find a different hop that is better in that situation, and by layering them in there, you're getting a much better overall character and an ability to switch to whatever hop you want.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have that flexibility. With IPAs still dominating the craft beer market, what are some tips for getting fresh hop flavors and aromas into your IPA?
Well, start with again, quality hops. I think that's, one of the most important things. The other that and then water does play a role in it. But the thing that people tend to disregard is fermentation. They don't think fermentation applies to hop character, to hop flavor, hop aroma, but it does. It has a huge effect. You can take two exact worts, ferment one with cal ale, ferment another, ferment more with something that is very subtle on hops and more malt, some of the lager yeast, some of the British ale yeast, and you will end up with two different beers. One tastes like you added caramel to it and no hops, and the other is bright. It's a different color and it's vastly more bitter and hoppy. That's what the yeast can do. So yeast and fermentation, quality fermentation, healthy yeast, proper amounts, proper temperature control, all that stuff, proper nutrition for the yeast makes a big difference in the hop character of a beer. So, that's an important part. And then, one of the things that, is more recent, and I know a lot of people probably heard of this, is just lowering the temperature of your whirlpool additions down to 170, 175, and you won't drive off as many oils, and you'll
particularly things like myrcene, I think, is pretty volatile at higher temps, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of these oils are. So
yeah,
you can do it even lower. You can do it higher, but start with real fresh hops. Watch your fermentation. Select the right yeast. Maybe do lower temperature whirlpool additions. Use more hops, and that's it.
Nice. Well, a question for me: Do you think the IPA rush will continue? And if not, what styles are eventually going to replace it, or perhaps emerge in the future?
The IPAs are here to stay and to stay very, very long time, I think. Hops are just so interesting and have so much character. And they're almost addictive. I think, IPAs and hazy IPAs will stay for a long, long time. I don't think there's any chance of it slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about this, and I wonder, maybe the next big wave is in the malts. Maybe the maltsters start coming out with something interesting and new. Maybe all of a sudden people, will really tune in to the malt characters, or there's some genetically modified yeast that people are starting to use. And I've tasted some of the tests that they've done with that, and it's really fascinating. They can insert a gene that develops a blackberry flavor. When the yeast ferment a wort, they'll taste like blackberries have been added. They can add the genes that produce a lot of the hop compounds, and something will taste really hoppy, and it's pretty amazing what they can do. So maybe the next big thing is in these genetically modified yeast beers. The thing that gives me pause there is I think a lot of people are very concerned about anything having to do with genetic modification.
Yeah.
So, that may be self-limiting. I don't know. So, maybe the malts, who came out with the red malt, was it Environment that came out with the red malt recently?
Red X, I think, has been very popular, I think, here at least.
So, it might be something along those lines. And, if they come out with a lot of new, interesting malts, maybe, those will work their way into beer, and it'll be something that brewers promote, talking to their customers. I mean, if they came out with a malt that produced something, some wine-like flavors, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I'd sure use it, and I'd sure tell people about it and why it was cool, and maybe that becomes a new wave.
A new
I don't
style.
think something like low gravity beers, low alcohol beers is really something that people will go crazy over. I'm not sure. People like to drink alcohol.
Seltzer, right?
Yeah, it just. I think seltzer's, gonna come and go. I think the big mega brewers are pouring a lot of money into it and driving the price down to commodity where it's 25 cents a can or whatever, and no other brewers really going to be into it. There's not. I don't know. I think the customers will kind of get tired of it and want to go back to some malt and some hops.
Yeah. Well, next question. We used to use mash outs steps, believing they'd stop the enzyme activity, but how relevant is a mash out step today? Is it really needed?
Well, it does a couple of things, and one is it thins out the sugars in the mash and helps it run off easier. So I would say from that perspective, it is quite useful. I'd say from the stopping enzymatic action, it does to some extent. But I really wouldn't worry about that. Extending your mash time a little bit more with, at the temperature you're at, it's really not going to do anything but improve your efficiency. It's not going to break down your mash. So I would, if everything's running off nicely and you don't have any problems with the viscosity of your mash or the sugars and problems, getting a good lauter, then I would you could skip that step entirely. But if you're having difficulties lautering and getting a good runoff, you may try raising the temperature because it thins everything out, it flows easier, and you tend to have an easier time of sparging, collecting.
Or maybe if you're working with non-barley malts, for example.
Right, like that. Right. Yeah. I think, it's just another tool in your arsenal if your mash isn't working right.
Next one, I get this question all the time. You created the Mr. Malty yeast calculator online, but a lot of yeast manufacturers now say that you can just do a direct pitch. You don't actually need a yeast starter anymore. How important is a yeast starter when working with liquid yeast?
Well, it depends. I would say all the manufacturers, they're saying you can direct pitch a packet or of yeast or whatever container, a can or whatever, direct into your beer of a given gravity and volume, and it will ferment well. I believe them. I'm sure it's absolutely true. They actually test these things. They don't just package up some yeast and say, yeah, that's gonna work. They actually throw it into some work themselves. They ferment it and they taste the beer and go, did that work right?
I always get nervous because they're doing that in a lab and the yeast hasn't been transported and stored and put on a shelf somewhere yet. So exactly,
and that's where the question comes up. And it's. I don't put this on the manufacturers. I don't necessarily put it on the retailers, and I don't put it on UPS or FedEx or whatever. It gets hot out there, and it's in some truck, and it's got to travel, and it's got to go some distance, and it gets exposed to some heat. Then it gets to the homebrew shop, and if it's a great homebrew shop, they immediately store that stuff away. And it's experienced almost no cold. Some homebrew shops, maybe they get busy. Maybe the box gets forgotten and sits out overnight, in a warm warehouse or something like that. And then, the yeast has, experienced some degradation. It's not much. I think if you're going to pitch it right away, that's probably fine. But then also, you need to look at the dates on the packs. I know this drives people nuts in the yeast business, but, if something is 6 months old, I guarantee you, even sitting cold, it has, experienced some degradation in viability, and it's used up some of its reserves and staying alive during those 6 months, even if it was stored cold and stored properly. So in those cases, it's really quite important, I think, to make a yeast starter. And I think even if it's the freshest you can possibly get, making a yeast starter really can be very helpful. It's not very difficult, and especially if you're doing a large brew, a batch of high gravity beer, it's great to build up the yeast, get it active, ensure that, all that you're pitching is viable. And, it's just a great thing to do. So I would always, err towards a starter unless you're absolutely certain you don't need one.
And obviously the style of beer comes into play too. Lagers require a lot more yeast, right?
Lagers, generally, on ales, I tend to go around 0.75, and for lagers, 1.5 or 1.25.
So twice as much.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the malts that are overused and underused in brewing, particularly home brewing?
Oh, that's interesting. Overused, probably things like aromatic and melanoidin and some of the others. And I take some of the blame for that, for including them in recipes back in the day. But, that's what worked for me. I would say, sometimes people overuse crystal malt and go way too heavy on that. But on the other hand, sometimes maybe they don't use enough crystal malts or the right crystal malts. I think, British crystal malts, British-based malts are woefully underused. They're amazing and unique, and not able to be replicated anywhere else. So I think, especially if you're trying to do a British-style beer, you need to use those malts, and so I think that's underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Overutilized might be, again, hard to say. I'm not sure what's overutilized, other than the melanoid and all that. Underutilized, maybe people are just not using enough, base malt. A clean American, 2-row malt is fantastic for, American styles.
I had a guy send me a recipe the other day, and I think it had 40 or 50% specialty malts in it. And it finished with a high gravity, which is not a big surprise, I guess, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of, if a little is good, more is better. And, so specialty malts in general, I like hops, you can do some layering of the malt character, and you can use various malts. But, there's something to be said for simplicity and a clean malt character as well. Base malt and, a couple of, specialty malts, and generally you're good. If you're starting to get 5, 6, specialty malts, or 10, you've gone with too many probably. And if, like you're saying, if 50% of your batch is, specialty malt, then you've made a mistake.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to come around here at the end and talk a little bit more about Heretic. First of all, how are you guys adapting to the current pandemic? Obviously, a lot of craft breweries struggling at the moment.
Yeah, it's been a struggle. The moment they started doing the shutdowns, all our draft business went to zero. And that was a large chunk of our business.
And probably the most profitable portion of your business too, right?
It definitely is. Probably the most profitable part of our business is the tap room. And the tap room, that went down to about 1/3 of, previous. We kind of made some adjustments and got it back up around 1/2. And now we've experienced some more closures, and it's down to, again, about to 1/3, between 1/3 and 1/2 of what it was.
Yeah.
So that's been really tough. The canned sales, canned beer sales have rocketed up.
Not surprisingly, people are at home, right?
Yeah, and that's been nice, but canned beer margins are much lower than draft or taproom margins. So we're making more beer, it's just not as profitable. And but it's kept the brewery fully employed. Everybody's working. We did have to reduce hours dramatically on the taproom staff, which was very painful. But there's just no choice to stay alive at this point in the business world.
Yeah. Well, what can homebrewers do? I know, there's so many craft breweries struggling right now. What are some things we can do to help support the craft brew industry?
Well, I think, most importantly, take care of yourself. Make sure you're healthy and safe, and doing the right things to protect yourself and your friends that are in the craft beer. So that you don't all die when all this when all this passes. We'll all be back together and enjoying beer. So take care of yourself. That's the most important thing. And then also, as always, if you can support your local brewery, if you can purchase some beers, if it's not a financial hardship on you, if you can purchase some beers, that's always appreciated. And try and also understand, kind of the stresses. Everybody's going through stresses. Everybody's suffering. But if you want to support your local brewery, understand that they're working under some weird conditions that change, at the drop of a hat. Every notice we've gotten to change our business was it takes effect immediately.
Yeah.
It's like, how about,
hard way to do
days
business
or
huh?
something? Yeah, it's just like all of a sudden you have to, radically change the way you're doing business, before the day is done. It's like I've never thought that would be coming, but 3 or 4 of these later, we've kind of gotten used to it, and it is what it is. You make the best of it, and keep moving forward, and you do okay. So we do really appreciate the support of the homebrew community and all craft beer lovers. It's been great. People have been very understanding. People have been very supportive. People continue to buy our beers, so that's appreciated. But most importantly, take care of yourselves. Don't risk your health. Be wise on this, so you'll live to drink another day.
Well, I'm glad Heretic's doing well, and you guys are making the adjustments you need to stay with it. I wanted to get your closing thoughts, Jamil, if you had any closing thoughts on beer brewing, home brewing in general.
Well, I had an interesting conversation on Beer Advocate about beer and brewing, and one of the interesting things, somebody was talking about, why you homebrew, and somebody was saying now you can get so many beers that you like, and I put out the point that if you're homebrewing to save money, well, then stop, because that's not what homebrewing is about. People sometimes get into it because they think they'll save themselves money, but there's so many great beers out there, and they're offering them up cheaper than you can make them yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, though, homebrewing is a passion. It's a wonderful hobby with a great community that's very supportive and, clever and interesting. And there's a lot of fun to homebrewing, and there's a lot of creativity to homebrewing. If you want a hobby that exercises your creativity and makes you, just chuckle and smile and have something to share with your friends that's interesting and great and really challenging and has so many aspects to it, well, then you need homebrewing. There's nothing like it. And, so it isn't about the money. And, sometimes people say, well, I can brew the beers I can't get. Sure, absolutely. That's the beers you can't get are, getting more and more limited these days. But I think, that's the wonderment of brewing. And, I feel really sorry for people that go into professional brewing that kind of lose that wonder and that fun and that excitement about doing something new and crazy. That's what home brewing is. And, I think we should all, appreciate that passion. It's something I think that's not talked about enough. When people talk about brewing your own beer, people think, yeah, I can save a bunch of money. And that's not what home brewing's about. It's not what brewing's about. It's about the passion and creativity. So I want everybody to keep that in mind, that's why you homebrew. So you can spend a ridiculous amount of money on equipment and ingredients that you don't really need, but darn it, I want to give it a try. So,
I think most hobbies are like that, right?
Yeah, and a lot of breweries are commercial breweries. One of the things I want to do is set up a double drop system, which is a system that was used in England for a long time, and it's pretty much been torn out of every brewery but a few. There's a couple of new breweries that set it up, but I really want to set up a double drop system to brew my British ales.
And what does that do? I've never heard of that.
So they start out pumping the wort into an upper vessel, and they let it ferment for 24 hours or so till it really gets going, and then it gets dropped. When it was at Fuller's, I talked to my friend John Keeling. He was telling me he was there when they did this back in the day. It would be dropped through a sintered pipe into a vessel below. And usually the vessel below is a square fermenter. It can be Yorkshire square, and then they would ferment from there. And the purpose of dropping was to agitate the yeast, stir it back up, provide it more oxygen, leave behind some of the trub and other bits that weren't desired in the beer. And they thought that this made a cleaner, better tasting beer. And so we have nothing like that in the United States. I've always wanted to do, cool ship. I want to do the Yorkshire Square. I want to do the double drop. The Burton Union is a lot of,
That's a lot.
Pipe work, and that's a lot to set up. I'm not sure, someday maybe, but I want to start on these. I was talking to John about, they have a lot of this equipment that they removed from the Fuller's Brewery back some years ago, and they saved it when they went to cylindrical fermenters and got rid of the drop system. So it's still there. And I said, look, John, convince them to send me that equipment. I will set it up at my brewery in California. Send me the 100-year-old recipes, and I will brew them as accurately as I can using the equipment that was used at Fuller's back in the day. He's like, well, who would drink that? I'm like, I can tell you all the beer geeks would go out of their minds to get hold of that beer. I think it would just be the coolest thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty innovative. The only thing I can think of that would be similar would be like, when you make mead, you beat the heck out of it every day a couple times, right?
Right.
Something similar.
Oxygen's such an important part of the process for yeast, initially, and then also, you can add oxygen to, we were always told not to add oxygen to fermenting beer, but that's not necessarily the case. I've been doing a lot of testing with high alcohol beers, and you dose in some oxygen when you dose in some sugar.
Yeah, you actually need it for the higher gravity fermentations, right?
And whenever we brewed, for the longest time, whenever I brewed something that was over 1080, I would give it, its initial dose of oxygen, pitch to the yeast, and then I would wait until, it's gone through some growth, and then I would, add another dose of oxygen, usually, 12 to, 24 hours later, I would hit it with a second dose of oxygen. And, what we were taught was, oh, no, never add oxygen to your beer once it starts fermenting. Once you add the yeast, you don't want to do that. But I found that the yeast will, as long as you don't overdo it and the yeast are still active, they will, pause and consume that oxygen and then keep going. And they will take up that oxygen. It's not an issue with making your beer stale. You will develop some other flavors and compounds, but in the high gravity beers, that's to be expected.
I do them for meads and wines. I do exactly the same thing.
Right.
Hit them at 12 hours or so.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of things to learn from, old brewers and the ways things were done in the past. Not all of them are necessarily better. Sometimes I imagine they're worse, but it can be a lot of fun to explore it. And another example, if you got time, was
sure. We got another minute or two.
Okay, when I was in England, I've heard a lot of people refer to the diacetyl rests in England, and they would say, yeah, we'll start cooling the beer down. We'll take it from 72 to 68 for a diacetyl rest. Mm-hmm. Or 72 to 64 for a diacetyl rest. And over here, we're always like, what in the world? What do you mean a diacetyl rest by lowering the temperature? It doesn't work that way, right? We raise the temperature for a diacetyl
Correct. Yeah.
And every, yeast producer I talked to was like, yeah, I don't know what the heck they mean. It's confusing. And so I was over there and I was talking to a friend of mine who worked at a great brewery called Stanbrooks. And he was telling me, Sean was telling me that he's like, well, I don't know, but that's the way we're trained. And he says, do you taste diacetyl in my beer? I'm like, no, I don't. He says, well, what his thought was, because it's top fermenting yeast, they've trained it all to rise to the top of the fermenter, and it's sitting up there. And then they do the temperature reduction, the diacetyl rest. The yeast trickles down through the beer. It causes it to fall through the beer. And that's when the diacetyl is taken up, because of the contact time with the yeast is increased. And you get that transition of the yeast from the top of the fermenter to the bottom. That's why the diacetyl rest, the temperature reduction of diacetyl rest works for them.
That's interesting. So it just lowers that whole yeast cake down through the beer, I guess, kind of filters it out. Is that it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Those big fluffy yeast tops just go through the beer, and they're very active at that point.
Well, Jamil, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for being here. I hope you won't wait 9 years to come on again. We'd love to have you on in 6 months or something.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and for being a good friend. And, you wrangled all that NHC or the homebrew conference stuff for us. So I really appreciate that.
That was fun. Yeah, we did a panel together. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you've been a great help to me and a great friend. So thank you.
Well, Jamil, I really appreciate you coming on again today. My guest today was Jamil Zainasheff, author, podcast host, and founder at Heretic Brewing. Thanks again, Jamil.
Thank you. Take care.
A big thank you to Jamil Zainasheff for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith to get your all-access pass today. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith. And also the Brew Commander, the new complete brewhouse controller from Blickman Engineering. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a digital brewhouse controller with high precision and the ultimate in flexibility. The Brew Commander offers automated step mashing, boil timers, and advanced brew day settings. Command your brew day with the new Brew Commander. To order yours today, visit blickmanengineering.com. Again, that's blickmanengineering.com. And finally, I urge you to give BeerSmith 3 brewing software a try. I've recently released the BeerSmith 3.1 desktop update, which includes improved data storage, additional dry hop options, new mash pH models, and much more. To download your free 21-day trial, go to beersmith.com today. Again, that's beersmith.com. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.